The Social Development Department today expected to launch the Child Poverty and Child Support Grant Review Report. The commissioning of this report was triggered by the need to revisit some of the policies on child support. Let's speak now to Professor Lauren Graham, a director at the University of Johannesburg's Center for Social Development in Africa. Professor, good morning to you and thank you very much. So ahead of the release of this report, can I simply ask this question to you? Is more funding needed to support the care of children in South Africa, particularly the underprivileged?
Absolutely. I think what we're going to see in this report is that the child support grant value of 510, it's just been put up to 510 at the beginning of this month, is still well below the food poverty line of 663 Rand. And remember, the food poverty line is really the minimum caloric intake, the amount of money that is needed to meet that minimum caloric intake. And so we see that the child support grant value is well below that food poverty line, and that in itself speaks to the need for additional funding to support children. But I think there's a broader question, because grants alone are crucial poverty alleviation mechanisms. But poverty is not simply about a lack of income. Poverty comes with a range of other challenges. And I think what we need to be thinking about in terms of policy shifts is not only about the value of the grant, although that's crucial, but also how else do we support families that are living in adverse circumstances so that we're able to achieve better child well-being outcomes.
You mentioned the figure, Professor, from 510, which is the current grant that is being channeled towards children, underprivileged children. You have mentioned the figure of 633.
63.
Oh, 663. Is that the amount perhaps that is proposed as what should be the minimum? And do you think that that is likely to go far enough? And what about government? Because National Treasury will likely say this is unaffordable.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. The child support grant, when it was first established by the Lind Commission, intended for the child support grant to meet childhood food and clothing basic necessities. And at the time, we didn't have a food poverty line, but now that we're seeing that the child support grant is so much below the food poverty line, we know that it is not enough even to meet the basic food needs of children. We do also have the National School Nutrition Program, which cushions that for children who are at school level, so not for children under the age of 7. But what we should be looking at is the lower or upper bound poverty line, which is set at the food poverty line plus an average of non-food basic items. It's a difficult trade-off. The child support grant reaches large numbers, 13 million children. It's a very well-targeted grant in terms of reaching the right families or the right children. But we don't seem to have these debates about, for instance, the old age pension, which sits at over 2,000. Now, granted, the number of people that are receiving an old age pension is much lower than the number of children receiving a child support grant. But I think simply on a justice point of view, and if we want to ensure that children are well fed so that they're able to achieve in other areas of their lives, we have to be looking at these other poverty lines, lower bound and upper bound poverty lines.
Yeah.
But I think we can't lose sight of the additional welfare services and additional services that are needed beyond that income.
Let's discuss then, Professor, because there will always be a push and pull factor. There will be those in our society who are going to say, this government is creating a welfare society. And what do I mean by that? Should there be, or do you think that there could ever be a discussion about grants not being dispensed, and I'm thinking here specifically child support grant and old age grant, because there is the other grant that is in the middle. We'll discuss that in a moment. But can these two ever be done away with, given our socio-economic standing in South Africa?
I would say certainly not in the short to medium term. If we manage to turn around things in this country and have low rates of unemployment, low rates of poverty amongst the working poor, then we could start looking at shrinking those grants. But that's a very long-term vision in this country. Unemployment in this country is structural in nature. It's not because people don't want to work. And so we have to have these safety nets in place if we want to ensure that we are investing in the future of our country. If we pull away these kinds of grants, what we're doing is we're saying that children should go to bed hungry, children should not have the clothing they need. These grants are absolutely crucial as poverty alleviation mechanisms in a context of high rates of poverty, high rates of structural unemployment and inequality. So we're not going to see them going away in the short to medium term. And I think what we need to talk about is the fact that we have the strong discourse of how grants create dependency. When in fact, grants are an investment in the future of this country. And grants, when they come into households, regardless of what kind of grant it is, that money is being spent in our economy. We know that that money is largely spent on food. It's largely from big retailers. So that money is going back in the economy. And we've also done some research that shows that where households are able to pool grants and other forms of income, whether that's from casual work or remittances from other family members, when they're able to do that, they're able to use a portion of that income to invest in their own livelihoods activities. That might mean selling a couple of things on the side of the road so that they're able to make a bit of extra money. So that cash injection into the household is not only crucial for meeting the basic needs of children, it is also going back into the economy. And so I think it's really important that we begin to break down that dependency debate that exists in the public discourse. So
here's a category of grants. The one that I said is in the middle. It's referred to as the Social Relief of Distress Grant. That was introduced in the time of COVID, and there has been a very strong advocacy for it to stay the 350 Rand, simply put. Now, there was someone who wrote an opinion piece recently saying that, and writing very definitively about it, that government needs to do away with this grant as soon as is possible. But juxtapose that with what one politician said in KwaZulu-Natal, which right now seems to be the hub of cash in transit heists. This person says, in Wanongoma, poverty and hunger is breeding hitmen. And I'm asking this question, again, related to what you have just said, that social grants are an investment into the future of this country. Where do you stand where the SRD is concerned?
I think there's a couple of things about the SRD. Firstly, just to say that the fact that we were able to reach over 6 million people so quickly during COVID with that SRD grant speaks volumes about the infrastructure we have in place in terms of our social security mechanisms. It was a huge internationally recognized achievement. There's been some very interesting research done on how that COVID SRD grant has been used. We ourselves did some work amongst informal traders who received that COVID SRD grant and found that grant helped them to keep their businesses running during COVID. It gave them a cushioning effect, meaning that they didn't have to dig into family reserves of money to keep their businesses running. So that gives us a little bit of insight about how these grants, as small value as they are, the COVID SRD grant is only at 350, nowhere near the food poverty line, but it gives vulnerable households a cushioning effect that enables them to then do other things. If we look at what happens in households that get both the child support grant and the COVID SRD grant, because remember they're targeted at different individuals, we see that those households are better able to manage child hunger in their households. So I think there's a complex debate about trade-offs that need to happen when we're thinking about extending this grant, but these grants do play a crucial poverty alleviation role, and potentially, depending on how they are mixed with other forms of income and other forms of support, potentially a role that helps people to begin to step out of poverty.
Yeah.
But that does require additional services and support. If we think about informal traders, for instance, additional business support and training is important. If we think about children who are receiving the child support grant, it's crucial that we're also supporting them to achieve in school. It's crucial that they're also getting their health checkups, their full vaccinations. We've been doing some work at Quintile 1 schools where we show how bringing together a community nurse, a social worker, the teacher, and we target children who are receiving the child support grants, how we can get better child well-being outcomes when we crowd those services around the child to address multi-dimensions of poverty.
Yeah. Final question to you, Professor. So as we look ahead to the release of this child support grant review report, what would you like to hear from the Department of Social Development?
I think what I would like to hear is that the child support grant needs to be increased in value, that it needs to, at the very least, be in line with the food poverty line. But I would really like to see some consideration paid to how do we connect child support grant beneficiaries or caregivers, I should say, with other support that they need, whether that's mental health support. We know that there's high levels of depression amongst people who are facing poverty, whether that's entrepreneurship support or other kinds of livelihood strategies, whether that is support in the schools for the children. So how do we begin to integrate the different policy mechanisms that we have in place to provide more holistic wraparound support to families and households that are living in poverty?
Professor Lauren Graham is a director at the University of Johannesburg's Center for Social Development in Africa. Thank you very much for your time and indeed your insights.